In the world of criminal investigation, truth often hides in plain sight, concealed within the mundane. The key to unlocking a case isn't always a dramatic confession or a smoking gun. Sometimes the smallest detail changes everything. A fingerprint, a stray hair, or a single leaf, a seemingly insignificant piece of nature destined to decay and be forgotten. This is the story of how one overlooked piece of nature, a silent witness for 2 decades, finally cracked a brutal murder case and brought a killer to justice. Our story begins in Ohio during the fall of 1992. The air was growing crisp, carrying the earthy scent of decay as the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold before surrendering to the coming winter. Life here moved at a slower pace. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other from their porches, and the most serious crimes were usually teenage pranks. A violent act was so rare it would become the stuff of local legend, whispered about for years. But on a chilly October morning, as a heavy fog clung to the ground, that cherished peace was irrevocably shattered. A local jogger on their usual morning route stumbled upon a scene that would forever alter the town's sense of security. A woman's body was found in a wooded area just outside of town. Word spread like wildfire, and the discovery sent shockwaves of fear and disbelief through the tight-knit community. The response was immediate and massive. Uniformed officers secured the perimeter, their faces grim, while seasoned detectives in plain clothes began the somber task of piecing together the victim's last moments. The bright yellow crime scene tape felt like a scar, cutting through the tranquil beauty of the autumn scenery. The scene was combed over meticulously. A slow, painstaking grid search. Investigators were desperate for anything that could point them in the right direction. Footprints, fibers, blood drops, tire tracks. Any clue to who had committed this terrible act. But they were fighting a losing battle against the elements. The ground was damp from recent rain, and the thick carpet of fallen leaves obscured the earth beneath. Most trace evidence had likely been erased by the weather. The killer had left almost nothing behind. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses to the crime itself, and no clear motive. Interviews with distraught friends and family painted a picture of a beloved woman with no known enemies. But detectives knew from experience that the most dangerous threats often come from those closest to us. Still, every lead turned into a dead end. Back at the county forensics unit, a young, sharp-eyed technician was methodically cataloguing every item recovered from the scene. As he examined the soil and debris collected from beneath the victim's body, he noticed something odd. Pressed flat into the dirt was a single leaf. Now, finding a leaf in the woods is hardly unusual, but this one stood out. It was a different species, a different shape from the native oaks and maples that dominated the forest. It looked completely out of place. It was an instinct, a professional hunch. Following protocol, the tech carefully bagged it, labeled it with a case number, and sent it to storage along with dozens of other pieces of potential evidence. It was just one item among many, a botanical anomaly with no apparent value. Because in 1992, a leaf didn't mean much to investigators. The tools simply didn't exist to unlock its secrets. Forensic botany was still in its infancy, and DNA testing was a blunt instrument, expensive and often inconclusive. As for plant DNA, that was the stuff of science fiction. So the leaf, a silent keeper of secrets, sat in a dark climate-controlled evidence room, waiting for decades. Months turned into years. The seasons changed, and the case grew colder with each passing winter. The original detectives retired, taking their frustrations and theories with them. New investigators took their place, but the woman's murder remained a painful, unsolved chapter in the town's history. There were a few promising suspects over the years, individuals whose names kept coming up. But without hard proof, they remained just that, suspects. There was no physical evidence, no confession, and certainly nothing that could convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. By the early 2010s, the case was all but forgotten by the public, a cold file buried in the archives. For the victim's family, however, the silence was a constant ache, until a newly formed cold case unit, a team of dedicated detectives, decided to revisit it. They were armed with something the original investigators never had: 2 decades of breathtaking advances in forensic science. The team methodically pulled every piece of evidence from storage: clothing fibers, old photographs, faded lab reports, and deep within one of the boxes, that same flattened leaf still perfectly preserved inside its evidence bag from 1992. This time, it wasn't just catalogued. It was sent to a state-of-the-art forensic lab, a place that would have seemed like science fiction to the original investigators. Technicians subjected it to a battery of tests, searching for every possible trace: pollen, soil composition, plant DNA, and most importantly, human DNA. The results that came back were not just shocking, they were the key that would finally unlock the entire case. First, the plant DNA. The lab identified the leaf's unique genetic markers. It belonged to a rare ornamental species of plant, one that only grew in a handful of specific, documented places in the entire county. It was not native to the woods where the body was found. When investigators cross-referenced those locations with their old case files, one address jumped out immediately. It was the home of a man who had been a prime suspect back in 1992, an avid gardener who had been questioned but never charged. But the final piece was even more damning. Under a powerful electron microscope, technicians found microscopic skin cells trapped in the leaf's veins. From these, they extracted a partial human DNA profile. It matched that same man. After 20 years of silence, the leaf was finally telling its story. Here's what happened. On the night of the murder, the killer walked through his own backyard and through the rare ornamental plants that he so carefully cultivated. A single leaf, a silent hitchhiker, clung to his clothing, or perhaps the sole of his shoe. When he carried the victim's body into the woods and left her there, the leaf fell, landing on the damp earth beneath her, where it was pressed into the soil by her weight. It was a botanical time capsule, a microscopic link between the killer's home and the crime scene. No one noticed it for decades, but it was there the entire time, silently holding the truth. Armed with this undeniable forensic link, the suspect, now 2 decades older, was arrested and finally brought to trial. In court, the prosecutor held up the small evidence bag for the jury to see. They called it the smallest piece of evidence with the biggest impact, the silent witness that never forgot. One leaf, one killer, 2 decades of mystery and a family's unending grief, finally put to rest.